Senior Assistant Editor, ETtech, and Amrit Acharya, co-founders and CEO, Zetwerk, onto stage. Just give them a second to sort out your chairs and you're good to go. All right, Tarush and Amrit, you have the unenviable task of speaking before lunch.
Okay.
You have 20 minutes, so make it exciting.
So, yeah, I think this is a tough spot, but, I just wanted to do a quick round of hands right before we start. So how many of you in the crowd have successfully raised funding for your startup at present? Or okay. Can we have the founders show their hands once? How many founders in the crowd? Okay, interesting. Got it. No, so very lovely to have you, Amrit. And I think we were discussing this, that it's been an amazing journey for Zetwerk, right from 2016, right? And I remember 2016 was largely the era of consumer, and then you took the dip in terms of B2B. So help us understand a little bit of that particular stage, right? Like when you were taking a dip into B2B, manufacturing, India was just still seeing the possibilities of startups disrupting manufacturing then, right? What are some of the theses that you were building for Zetwerk then that still holds true even today? And what were some of the things that the investors were telling you, right? Was there any anecdotes of pivots that they were kind of suggesting to you when you were engaging with them? And the thesis, please.
Yeah, so just one small correction there. We started in 2018.
Yes.
And in my case, journey to start Zetwerk started, the first step was actually the journey to move back to India. So I was based in the US, had gone there for business school, and I was working there. And yeah, I left around 2014. That was around the time when the startup ecosystem in India was picking up, and I constantly felt that I left India at the wrong time. And hence I was just looking for an opportunity to come back as quickly as possible, which for me presented in 2018. When we looked at what I wanted to do, I basically looked at what I'd done before. My first job was at ITC, which is large consumer goods conglomerate. Within ITC, my first role there was to build a new factory for them. And I was 21 years old. I was handling hundreds of crores of procurement, hiring a lot of people. And I fell in love with manufacturing back then. And hence, we didn't look at, okay, this is what's hot or this is what's trending. We looked at what we knew, what we understood, what we were excited with. Because the consistent advice I had received from other founders is that longevity is important, because this is a long process. It takes 7 years, 10 years, maybe even longer to build a company. So we can't be attached to something which we care about superficially. In my case, it was this. My co-founder, his family business was into manufacturing. So it fell together fairly organically, I would say. We didn't look at what was trending well, what was not trending well at that time. Yeah. I think you asked a question on investors. I think that one was tougher. I think when we started, a lot of people didn't understand what we were doing. We have raised many rounds of investment. I would still say our seed round was the toughest, which was $1 million back then. Mostly because, and some of the anecdotes we got were pretty interesting. Some of the anecdotes we got were pretty interesting in the sense that.
Can we?
Hello. Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, just saying some of the anecdotes we got were pretty interesting. Like one of the funds we met, who actually ended up investing in us, the feedback we got was A+ team, B market, which was their way of saying, look, why are you doing this? But at the same time, like we had an insight which was original, and I think that way venture capital as an industry, I still find it very surprising in a positive way that there is that risk appetite to try something new. We benefited from that, where while we were doing something different, our insights were unique to us and based on our own personal experiences. So I think that resonated well with a pool of investors that did invest in the company. And ultimately, you need one yes. That's the axiom. You maybe talk to 100 people, but one yes is all you need, and that worked well for us. Yeah.
So you're largely saying like one yes is what it takes, I think, and of course Zetwerk has come on its own journey since then. I wanted to also ask you this is, the ecosystem, you rightly said that, people don't understand the B2B manufacturing space, but I wanted to ask you, we're still learning about it, right? For instance, one thing that comes across and everybody I'm sure asks you is revenues, right? FY19 was 16, FY21 was around 850, 851, jumped to 4,900 plus. Can you explain and decode this, right? What does it mean for a B2B manufacturing startup to multifold their revenues year on year, right? And what goes behind it? What have Zetwerk done that it kind of jumps in?
Yeah, so we've had a good run, and in fact, last year we did around 11,500 crores. We doubled from the previous year. I think it's a combination of two things that has worked well. One is the business model itself. Our business model, generally speaking, is asset light, which means that what we do is we work with large companies who want to get products made, and we execute those orders through small manufacturers that we work with. And hence, in a sense, we are leveraging an ecosystem that already exists. There is, lakhs of SMEs in the country. Most of them are having underutilized capacities. So our business model was actually making sense, where we would work with mid to large companies who would give us orders, and we would get them executed with small manufacturers who already had capacity. So nobody needed to invest any new money to execute that new business. Today we work with thousands of suppliers every month, and in a sense our growth is dependent on, can we keep discovering newer and newer suppliers to work with? Can we still have the same SLAs around time and quality that we can offer to our customers? And as long as we can do that, the business will continue to grow. What we also discovered is that the categories we were operating in were actually horizontal categories, but were for some reason operating as vertical categories. I'll give an example. We do some work in solar, we do some work in oil and gas. The underlying manufacturing is called steel fabrication. The manufacturing process is the same for solar or oil and gas. It's just that our supplier was previously from the oil and gas industry and just did not know that there is a world outside of oil and gas. So for a lot of our suppliers, we've introduced new TAMs, new customers, which they would have otherwise not found it easy to do on their own. A common reason for this is there is a lack of trust in the India broadly. When we talk to some of our smallest suppliers and we say, look, you've been working with these last, I'll give an example. My co-founder, Srinath, his father ran a small manufacturing unit, and he was an employee at this company called BHEL for 10 years. He decided to become an entrepreneur, set up a small fabrication shop in Trichy, and for the next 10 years, BHEL was his only customer. And this is fairly typical. And when you ask him, hey, why didn't you get more customers? And the common answer you will get is new customer is not opportunity, new customer is risk. Today, if there is any problem with BHEL, I can go to their office, sort out my problems. But tomorrow, if I get an order from GE, let's say they're based in Delhi, I can't go to Delhi and solve my problems. So the industry, a lot of traditional internet businesses say that they want to eliminate a middle layer. D2C is one example. They're going direct to the consumer. In our case, we're actually creating a middle layer between two parties that used to transact with each other directly. The reason that works is there is a trust deficit between the buyers and suppliers. If you take a metric like NPS, which is a net promoter score of the industry, this was actually a negative NPS industry. Buyers and suppliers did not trust each other for whatever legacy reasons. So the business model that we created is able to solve for that. And secondly, we have been benefiting from favorable macroeconomic environments in the last couple of years, especially. We were discussing close to 1/3 of our revenue today comes because of China plus one. We ship a lot of products made in India to the US. These are US customers who were previously buying from China and now moving to India. And we have a small but fast growing consumer electronics business, which is essentially companies who were importing products from China and now want to localize manufacturing in India. Both of these two things were 0% of our revenue 2 years back, but now is a third. The reason they exist is because the market has changed.
Do you, I mean, I will come a little bit to the international strategy also that you're doing, but you know, when you see the jump of revenues, today when you see where Zetwerk stands, how much is the headroom, right? Is there still a lot of headroom, and how are you quoting yourself for, let's say, macroeconomic changes, right? Or changes in policy that might come in?
So headroom is essentially TAM, like how big is the addressable market. And in the categories we operate in, the markets are pretty big. Like consumer electronics, the industry itself is growing 20-30% year on year, largely driven by increase in spend. And then there's a mixed impact of how much we used to import and how much we are localizing manufacturing in India. So for us, the market is A cross B, which is A, the industry growth, and B, how much is the mix growth. Similarly, there is some kind of tailwinds in most of the sectors we operate in. We do a lot of work in CapEx. Historically, CapEx is very cyclical. Last 10 years, you could say we were at the bottom of the cycle. We are slowly starting on the upward path. So which means that, and we're seeing some of this. If you look at the government budgets that get announced, every year the increase on spend on infrastructure is increasing year on year. Last year was around 1.5 lakh crores. So that way it feels like, and we look at certain very esoteric metrics which are very, they may seem quirky. We look at per capita consumption of steel in India. It is around 70-80 kgs per person. The world average is 250, China is 400. So which means that if India aspires to become a developing economy, it should be at least the world average. So we do feel that spend in India in the categories we operate in will increase from what it is today to where it will be. We have built the business at the right time where we will benefit from as these industries grow. So I think there's a lot of headroom. What is your second question? Sorry.
No, so I was also asking you in terms of how much is the headroom and how do you quote yourself in a way from the cyclicity of the business and the macroeconomic conditions changing.
So in that way, I think we've got lucky. Like we didn't know this, but we started the company in hindsight at one of the worst possible times, which is India had just implemented GST. So that way we didn't have a pre-GST, post-GST era in the company. We always had a post-GST era, but because there was a lot of dampness in the economy just when GST had just been implemented. Then there was COVID, which was bad for everyone. But now all those things have unwounded, and hence what we're sitting on now is largely opportunity. Starting the business at the time which we did a few things well, like the fundamentals are strong. For the first couple of years, we raised very little capital. Most of the capital we have raised is actually in the last couple of years. And because we started the company with a low capital raising environment, we built the business with a strong P&L on day one. Like while we were not profitable in the first couple of years, we were almost profitable for the first 2-3 years. And our first full year of profitability was 2021, which when it was not the flavor of the season, like nobody wanted companies to be profitable back then. But in our case, it was a very natural progression just because that was the way the company got built. Now what that helped us is today when we try to do something new or enter a new category or market, we are doing it from a strong base where the core business is generating free cash, which we get to invest in new categories and new opportunities.
I wanted to come to that, obviously, is the question around profitability, right? Like, I know that you kind of keep telling us every time at least we meet that it is ESOPs and you believe strongly in giving ESOPs. But when you are looking at the journey and the business, right, when do you see is a good time to say we are going to be PAT positive and move from there?
Definitely, so we are profitable at an EBITDA level. And in fact, this year, even factoring for non-cash ESOP expenses, we were EBITDA positive. So the next logical milestone is PAT positive. I think it will happen. But by being EBITDA profitable, it allows us, whatever capital we generate, it allows us to reinvest back into the business. So we are still, I just want to remind everyone that we're still a 5-year-old company. We started in 2018. We still have a lot of headroom ahead of us, and we want to keep on reinvesting back into the business. And we are seeing a lot of change around us. As an example, US is now 20% of our revenue. We need to invest into the business. It doesn't happen without any investment. And investment at the beginning will be largely cost and not much revenue. And it takes some time. The best analogy is actually an analogy that is closer to home for us. If you want to set up a new factory, it takes 1 year to set up a factory. For that 1 year, you'll be loss making. But once that factory starts generating output, eventually you'll start making profit. So it is important to understand where capital is being allocated. I think being EBITDA positive allows us to know that we are at least having strong product market fit. This is a business that can sustain itself on its own. Then when you stop investing, you'll suddenly become PAT positive. I think that's where it is.
So you're not giving us a year, definitely, on that. But, I also wanted to ask you, this is investments, right? I think Zetwerk has been doing a lot in terms of investments in the manufacturing space, right? And I remember last year when we were speaking, you said that, we also want to direct investments in manufacturing capabilities and build that in India, where India has a stand to kind of win, right? Consumer was one of them and stuff like that. Help me understand, how much are you investing in terms of either building your own manufacturing setups, right? And or how do you see that investment going in, and which are some of the areas where you see that there is need for that infrastructure building?
Yeah, I think the step back is why are we doing it? Like our model was asset light. Have we changed our model? So the way we think about it is we are very attached to the problem we are solving. We are attached to the problem that we want to make manufacturing reliable. We want to deliver products on time with the right quality that our customers expect, and create a level of transparency that increases trust between all stakeholders. Now, in certain categories where the supply chain is already existing, we will just leverage on that supply chain and build our layer on top. In certain categories, that supply chain doesn't exist. Like, we'll take consumer electronics as a good example. India used to import, every product that we consume in India used to be imported from China. The reason we were importing was there was no suppliers in India. Now, suddenly you can overnight change the demand scenario that we would like everything to be made in India. But factories as a minimum take a year or two to set up. So supply will always lag demand. Now, us as a business, we can take a position. We will wait 5 years, 10 years for the industry to get created. Then we will layer our business model on top. Or we can take a position that, look, we are in a prime position to catalyze some of the shift that is happening between China to India. And if we don't do it now, we will probably not be able to do it 5 years later. And we will probably do it better than a lot of other companies would. So if we, and that solution is a very natural solution because you're attached to the problem you're solving. You're not rigid on the solution that you have created. So we have made some investments in consumer electronics, where there is things like PLI, there is Make in India, there's a lot of shifts that's happening. We actually also have made some investments in the US, where in the US there are, similar to PLI, there's this Inflation Reduction Act which says that US wants to move some manufacturing back to US. Again, it's easier said than done. Like, US does not have manufacturing depth. Somebody needs to create it. And we feel that we're in a prime position to do that today.
But is there somewhat of a quantification that you can give us in terms of...
we've already invested close to 50 million USD, and we'll probably do more.
And this is India?
This is India and US combined.
Oh, interesting. I also wanted to, and I was smiling this is because when you were saying you're a 5-year-old company, because we always have this kind of tussle that we don't see Zetwerk anymore as a young company. We see it as a very late stage company, but and then it just strikes us that you're just 5 years old and you've come so far. I also wanted to talk to you a little bit about acquisitions. You've made 4 acquisitions last year, and acquisitions are tough The easy part is just scouting, and the toughest part is integrating it. How is that going along with you? And are you still scouting for more acquisitions in the market?
Yeah, so we have done few acquisitions, and I completely agree. Acquisitions look great on Excel, and they often don't translate into reality. We have never scouted for acquisitions. Like we have the few acquisitions we have done, we have either acquired one of our customers or one of our suppliers. So these are companies where we had operating relationship for the last 2 years at least. And hence, we look at the specific pain point that we are solving for, like every M&A is different. But once we identify the pain point, and then we look at any companies that we're already familiar with. So what we have not done is we get a lot of deal flow from, let's say, investment banks and others. We take our time with those. We have not really committed to anything that has come in that channel. But when leads get generated from the business, they're often the best leads. One general trend that I am seeing, which I think will be a big theme for the next 10-15 years, is a lot of the existing manufacturing capability in the country, and even let's say in markets like US and Europe, there's a lot of generational turnover that is happening. These are businesses that were set up in the 80s. Those founders are now turning 60, 65. They realize that their children are not interested in taking over that business. So traditionally, private equity has played that role in creating a new home for those businesses. But in India, at least, that depth is not there. If it makes sense for us, then we are happy to play that role. Where instead of an M&A, it's more like how do we plan for a succession for some of these deep manufacturing assets that are already there in the country. And if we have a business model that can leverage that and make 1 + 1 = 5 or 10, then that's something we'd be interested to do.
I also want to ask you the $1 million question. Everybody's looking at you and being like, so when do you IPO now?
Yeah, again, I'll remind you that we are 5 years old. No, that being said, we are looking at IPO somewhat seriously. We recently brought on board a very experienced CFO into the company. He was with the RPG group for last 9 years. The intent is to start looking at when can we go public. For us, I think it is still 2 to 3 years away. And that actually fits in nicely with the how long companies typically take. Like before, I would say the last 5 years, the general average was 7 to 8 years. And that is why fund lives got constructed around that time. Most of the funds have a 7+3 investment horizon because that's typically how long it takes for companies to get IPO ready. In the last few years, when there was a surplus of private capital, those timelines did get extended to maybe 10 to 15 years. But I think 7 to 10 years is the right sweet spot for us. And probably that's the timeline we're looking at for getting public.
So do we see 25, 26?
Somewhere around that timeline.
And is the intent India?
Yeah, we are an India headquartered business. We are going to go public in India. I think there's been no confusion around that. So, yeah.
No, absolutely. My last question, 1 or 2 questions, I think we're almost out of time, is one is capital, right? What's happened with you is you've raised capital successively and successfully as well, and that's played out to your strength. But now it's more of FCFs that would be also fueling a lot of your growth, etc. So where do you now see capital allocation that's going to go into the business? 100 mil was what you just raised. It's at least was there in the filing somewhere. So tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, I mean, so there is a lot of shift that is happening as we just spoke about. There is Make in India, there is US, and these businesses are, while they're sizable for us, they're still in the growth phase, I would say. So our intent is to invest in these categories. The strength of our business model is while we are present in many different industries, they all have their own quirks and idiosyncrasies and cyclicalities. Right now, consumer electronics is hot. Right now, capex is hot. Solar is hot, and hence, in a way, that is reflecting in our P&L because these are categories that are doing well fundamentally. At some point, it is possible that they may not be having the tailwinds that they're experiencing right now. So our idea is, I think, where we stand today is, if a new category is doing well, we may not find out on day 0, but we will definitely find out on the 6 month or the 1 year timeline. And if it is a 5-year, 10-year trend, that is still fairly early. So we'll keep looking out for what is having some structural tailwinds. Why is today the right time to invest in that category? Like these are categories that existed for a long time. But what is different today than, let's say, 5 years back? And if there's a compelling answer, then we'll try and allocate more capital there.
But you're saying that it's also for future movements, right? In case if you feel that the business needs to move in that direction, and obviously you are 5 years old and you are agile, so if you want to move in that direction.
I'll give an example of this. Like we have, as I said, 20% of our revenue comes from the US.
Yes.
These are all products we make in India, we ship to US. We've reached volumes there, instead of taking containers, we rent entire ships. That's the scale. But now if the US is deciding that some part of that manufacturing they want to do in the US itself, either that will happen with us or without us. We can stay where we are and fight the trend, or we can make some investments in the US. In essentially, we are preventing ourselves from getting disintermediated by somebody else. So that requires investment. That requires making sure that business has the right solution that is required for that market. And it's something that we have to constantly be on top of. We can't say that, look, this has worked so far and hence it's going to work for the next 5 years, because while manufacturing historically has been slow and boring, right now it's been very agile and fast, and hence we need to be agile and fast as well.
I also wanted to quickly ask you is, there are a lot of tailwinds now towards this sector, right? And India is very strongly beating it to the world that we want to be a manufacturing hub, right? With the deals that we are signing in. Where do you see the next 10 years now, right? Like everybody's like manufacturing is a hot sector. Where do you see gaps which you think that you can fill, and gaps which you think newer startups can kind of now fill in? And I'll just end up with that is, are you planning an accelerator program for some of these startups or something very cool so that they get support and understand from large platforms like yours?
Yeah, I think this is probably the golden age of Indian manufacturing. I think there has never been a better time. Certainly when we started, we didn't think we would get to where we are today. I think we have exceeded our own expectations as a business. And at the same time, we never thought that sentiment would be so strong. I think this has been, for the longest time, my parents didn't know what I was doing. but now they somewhat understand. And I think that's great, because the more activity that gets into manufacturing, the better for the economy. Ours is an industry which creates a lot of jobs, and it adds directly to the GDP of the country. If we can move volume from other countries to India, it is net new GDP addition that we are delivering for the economy. So it's very, historically it was difficult to draw a straight line between the work you did and the result it was creating, but today that straight line is very, very visible. And hence we hope that more people do join that industry. I think we have created a horizontal platform. We can't do everything. All of these categories are deep on their own, and they have very industry-specific nuances and problems. So I think the next wave should be attacking specific pain points that are unique to those industries. And that's why I was very interested in the maritime thing that we were doing earlier. I think that's a great initiative, because each of these categories by themselves are very deep, and we are solving horizontal supply chain problems. We are not doing much R&D as a business. We are not creating any new product. We are saying, how do we bring a product to market? The next phase is, how do we create better products that are more efficient or cheaper? We are trying to help in that. We have created a program called Zetwerk Build. It's not an accelerator in the true sense where we don't provide capital, but we provide, when a new hardware-oriented company starts, they have to create a new product, they have to sell that product, and then they have to manufacture that product. We are taking away that last pain point away. We want early stage companies to focus on creating best-in-class products.
Right.
We want you to create a distribution that can enable you to sell that product, and we will help you with taking care of all the manufacturing pain point. We have already done this with almost 20 odd companies in India, and some in the US as well. And we find that for a lot of small companies, this actually gives them a lot of bandwidth that they can put into the front end when they know that their back end is kind of sorted. So we'll keep on doing that. It's called Zetwerk Build. Yeah, we'd encourage anyone to think about it and apply.
No, absolutely, and thank you so much, Amrit, for joining us at this conversation. I always appreciate talking with you, and it's always lovely. Thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen. Amrit Acharya.
Thank you.
Thank you, Tarush and Amrit. We will soon be